So next on the agenda is Tercia Jansen van Vuuren. Tercia is a research associate with the Laing O'Rourke Centre, and she is the lead researcher working on this report and guide. And Tercia will now introduce the guide, the methodology, quantifying the benefits of offsite construction, henceforth known as the Jansen report. Over to you, Tercia.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar about our report, Methodology for Quantifying the Benefits of Offsite Construction. Whilst we're disappointed that our original launch event had to be cancelled, we hope that this intervening time has given you the opportunity to download and read the report, and we hope that you enjoy this virtual webinar. In our presentation today, we don't have time to go into every aspect of the report, so I'm going to give you an overview of the research approach followed and highlight a few important points. The level of interest that we have already received about this report, during the research and even prior to publication, highlights that offsite construction is really a key aspect of today's construction industry. In this report, we've used a broad understanding of the term offsite construction. Any construction activity that removes construction from the final site and with units or elements constructed in facilities away from site and then brought to site for installation. There are many perceived benefits of offsite construction that are used to drive the adoption and the promotion thereof, and these include things like a shorter build schedule, so shorter time on site, improved construction quality, better health and safety, lower environmental impact, and so forth. However, there's minimal objective evidence-based research to validate and quantify these benefits. This is true in both academic and industry literature and studies. If we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, we see that over the past 30 years, there have been many strategic reports that have highlighted the challenges facing the construction industry with recommendations on how to fix this, starting as long ago as 1994 with the Latham report, and then famously in 1998 the Egan report, Rethinking Construction, and then more recently 2016 the Farmer Review, and 2017 the Industrial Strategy, and 2018 the Construction Sector Deal. Several of these reports mention the potential of offsite construction to address some of the construction industry's challenges and failings. So why did we think it was necessary to write another report about offsite construction? So as we've just noted, there are many potential benefits that could improve the industry's performance, but there's little evidence to back this up. Our aspiration with this research was to quantify these benefits that are attributable to offsite construction. It is important to acknowledge that there may be many factors that inhibit or act as barriers for people to take up offsite construction, with a lack of evidence just being one aspect. But nonetheless, we believe it is valuable to have a robust understanding of how offsite construction benefits projects. Through this research project, we set out to establish a consistent and repeatable methodology for evaluating project performance, with the intention of determining how offsite construction impacts or influences project outcomes, to what extent these project outcomes are impacted by your construction approach, and whether the expected benefits are delivered. It was important to us as a research team that this report was relevant to industry. So we set up a project steering group right at the beginning with over 20 different organizations, from contractors to clients and consultants. And they have fed into every step of the way of this research, and we're very grateful for their input. Before we dive into detail, there's several things to note. Firstly, this report is not a how-to on offsite construction. It doesn't tell you when offsite construction is most appropriate and how to incorporate it on your project. Secondly, we've adopted a broad approach to understanding offsite construction, as I mentioned earlier, so we're not only speaking about volumetric, modular, or panelized. It's a broad approach, and a broad approach that follows the modern methods of construction definition framework. And thirdly, whilst offsite construction is used in both infrastructure and building projects, it became apparent very quickly that we weren't going to be able to address both infrastructure and building with one report and methodology. So we decided to focus on buildings. And also, this is meant to be a generically applicable overarching framework and not specific to only one type of building project. We'll now look at the project objectives and look at the process of how we research the quantification of the benefits of offsite construction. This research was carried out in a series of steps to help focus the outcomes. The first is the identification and definition of metrics. So in this step, we looked at what are those aspects on a project that we expect to be impacted by the construction approach. So looking looking beyond only the capital costs. We wanted to look more broadly at the broader project, the broader construction environment, and then more widely look at the societal impacts, such as workforce quality of life, community benefits, and the benefits to industry. So for each of these metrics, for each of these areas, we had to define metrics and look at ways to define these where it's consistent with boundaries of assessment to ensure that the metrics can be measured with consistency across different companies and projects. The second step was to bring these metrics together into a methodology that could be used by project stakeholders to review construction projects and evaluate outcomes. Important to note that because this methodology is generic, there's no weightings applied to metrics, because that's very specific to the project type and the client and the project team as to what metrics may be more important than others. So it's all equal, yeah, no weightings applied. We wanted to test our methodology by on actual delivered construction projects. So we collected project data and we got case study projects from willing members of our project steering group and other interested parties as well. And our final step was the systematic review of these case studies to analyze the delivered results and outcomes and to determine if and how offsite construction impacted these. So this starts the creation of the evidence base about the performance of projects and how construction approach influences these outcomes. Very important to clarify that this is not a hypothetical comparison. So it's not taking one project that is constructed using one approach, such as volumetric modular, and looking at what would the outcomes be. And then if we had to take the same project and construct it using a different approach, such as traditional brick and block or panelized, and hypothesizing what those outcomes would be and then comparing, or what is the benefit of the different approaches. We felt that that approach, whilst useful in some cases, was not what we wanted to achieve with this research, and does not create this evidence base of actual delivered outcomes. So now that you have this overview of the research process followed, we'll look into more detail at this first step of identifying and defining metrics. Through reviewing academic and industry literature, as well as consultation with our project steering group, we established several key areas of impact within which metrics could be grouped. So we've got things like cost, time, quality, health and safety, and labour requirements, and those are really specific to the project. And if you go slightly more broadly, you've got the environmental considerations, the community around the construction site, local disruption, life cycle considerations, and then even more broadly, if you look at the societal impacts, workforce quality of life, wider industry benefits and wider community benefits. For each of these areas of impact, we looked for specific metrics that could be used to measure project performance. And wherever possible, we sought to use existing methods to make it as easy as possible to adopt, as many companies and many organizations are already measuring many of these aspects in certain ways. We wanted to adopt already used methods to make it as easy as possible. This was an area that we engaged heavily with the project steering group to ensure the relevance to industry. However, even in our small subset with just 20 to 30 members, we could not reach complete agreement on what is most important or how to measure this. And I think this really highlights the challenge that exists in creating a consistent methodology across industry. Now, to show you an example of quite a familiar area of impact, I'm going to look at some of the metrics we used in cost. So this is a table out of the report showing some of the metrics under the heading of cost. We've got, so alongside total construction costs, like the final actual cost and the predicted cost. We've also got the cost of the construction works. So to establish consistency, we've used things like the RICS elements, 1 to 5. So for all projects, what was the cost of just those elements of the construction? And then we've got the associated construction costs. So here we've got main contracts, prelims, and contingencies, risks, and again, defining those according to the RICS elements. So to give you an understanding, so why we've included prelims is that prelims are noted in several reports and studies as potentially being lower cost on offsite construction projects because there's less setup required, there's less scaffolding, shorter time on site, that kind of thing. So we wanted to see, does this actually translate into practice with lower prelims on projects with higher levels of offsite construction? And similarly with contingencies and risk, if a project has a greater predictability and greater certainty in the outcomes if there's a higher level of offsite construction. Does this translate into lower contingencies and risk costs attributed on a project? And then we've got the construction cost certainty, so to try to establish whether there's greater certainty, greater predictability of projects with a higher level of offsite construction than traditional projects. And as I've explained for each of these, we've done that in the report. For every metric, we have a little paragraph explaining why we think it's valuable to be measuring this, have a little bit of a discussion as to challenges around measuring, yeah, a bit more detail. So it gives you an understanding of the process behind selecting the metrics. Alongside these metrics, we also need information about the project itself to ensure that we can make fair comparisons and to try to understand how other factors, apart from the construction methodology, may have influenced the results. So, for example, intuitively, we know that a secondary school in the Midlands is not the same as a primary school constructed in the centre of London. So how do we differentiate these projects? And I've just got a selection of the key project descriptors that we asked for when we collected project information. So here we've got project type. So is it a primary, secondary? Is it an all-through school? Work type, is it new build? Is it new build and extension? The regional location, so is it in the Midlands? Is it in London? The gross internal floor area, and then very importantly, the pre-manufactured value, which gives us an understanding of the level of maturity of offsite construction. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that later. Once we had our metrics and methodology, we wanted case study projects to test it on. So to narrow our focus of the research and provide meaningful results, we decided to select a specific sector. And again, in consultation with the PSG, the project steering group, we chose the education sector, looking at schools projects. Several reasons for this, but primarily because within schools, offsite construction has been applied with some level of maturity, meaning that we're hopefully going to be able to get projects constructed with a high degree of offsite construction where we could look at actual delivered results, and as well as across the spectrum to traditional projects and look at delivered results and be able to compare it. The ideal situation would be to measure all the metrics across the full life cycle of the assets and get a comprehensive assessment of outcomes. However, we relied on the information that was available and accessible on our case study projects, which resulted in a reduced list of metrics that we could measure. As all of the organisations who provided case study projects were contractors, this meant that our project results are construction phase centric. So we don't get this full life cycle look at a project, but we're only able to look at the construction phase. We received and analysed 46 projects from 6 different contractors, ranging from small contractors to multi-billion-pound organisations, with projects located across the UK with a variety of build solutions, procurement strategies, and contractor experience. The engagement of these contractors who provided data demonstrates a willingness to collaborate and share information to improve the construction industry, and we're so grateful for their input, because without them, we really wouldn't have been able to present much at all. So as I mentioned, our time is limited, so we'll briefly look at some of the findings of the research now. One of the first things that became clear very early on was that it would not be possible to definitively and quantitatively calculate the pre-manufactured value consistently across our 46 different projects. In industry currently, there seem to be 2 ways in which pre-manufactured value is calculated quantitatively, and these 2 calculations I'll put up. The first comes from the Construction Leadership Council's housing metrics, and the second from the Department of Education's Modern Methods of Construction framework tender. And unfortunately, on our project, neither of these calculations was able to be used consistently. So we therefore decided to use a traffic light ranking, a qualitative traffic light ranking, where largely traditional projects would be low, and on the other end of the spectrum, where projects using innovative or a large amount of offsite construction would be high. And this is not ideal, as it is difficult to ensure consistency, as what one person might think of as really kind of traditional construction, another person might think, oh, that's quite medium. There's the quite a middle range of offsite construction there. But nonetheless, it provides us some way of correlating the level of offsite construction with the project outcomes. This chart shows the total installed construction costs on the vertical axis for each of our 6 contractors. So, for example, contractor 1, we had 3 projects. One of them was medium PMV, so PMV is pre-manufactured value, and 2 of them were high PMV, and with a total installed construction cost of around £17 million. And interestingly, if you look at contractor 2, there's 3 low projects, 3 medium projects, and 7 high projects. But the total construction value of the 7 high projects, they're all of them are quite small projects compared to the 3 medium projects are bigger projects. Yeah, so this is the spread of information, the spread of projects we've got across our 6 contractors. This chart shows the regional distribution of projects received and highlights the difficulties that exist in comparing projects and the different behaviours that can be expected. For example, contractor 5, all of their projects were located in London, where there may be a cost premium on labour or materials, but also they might have similar clients, similar construction teams, so they're able to transfer learning and experience across projects, hopefully. And contractor 2, conversely, if you look at them, their projects are located all over across the country, from the Midlands to East of England to Yorkshire. So it's much more difficult for them to transfer learning and relationships across the different projects. Turning now to look at the actual project information that we received. So for each of our case study projects, we asked there was a list of 23 fields that we asked contractors to fill in about the project. For each of these, you can see, so for example, for total construction cost, the actual and predicted, 100% of our projects, all 46 were able to report on that. And similarly, for time on site, actual and predicted, all 46 projects gave us information on that. Whereas if you look at the energy rating, so the rating from the energy performance certificate and the energy usage, less than half of the projects were able to give us information on this. So this is just a subset of the metrics that we asked for, just to give you an idea of the range of information, of how complete the information that we got was. On average, projects were only able to complete 15 of the 23 fields. So again, it's very difficult, even on our small subset case study, 46 projects, even on our reduced list of metrics, we weren't able to get a full picture of what was happening. We'll now have a brief look at some of the overall findings of the report. One of the first things we found when looking for ways to measure and quantify the impacts of offsite construction was that the information that we need is simply not collected. So for example, many reports and studies mention that offsite construction reduces vehicle movements on site. So in our area of impact, we had local disruption. So one of the metrics that we selected there was number of vehicle movements. However, in practice, contractors do not generally track or record this in any way that can be picked up at a high level. So there's no technical reason for this, because it could be deduced by delving into delivery and waste removal records. But this information is just simply not fed up into the high level way that can be found and reported. In a similar vein, another key finding is the difference between what ideally should be measured to quantify the impact versus what is practically able to be measured based on available information. A striking example for us of this was build quality. So logically, the cost of rework due to errors or poor quality would be a good indication of the build quality of a project, but information on this does not appear to be collected at all. The only information that is readily available is the number of defects. So this is rather unsatisfactory, because you could have many small, low consequence defects, and these are defects post handover to clients. It's a very defined point in the project that we could use, but there's no way to differentiate between many small defects and a few larger defects that may have higher consequence or be of more inconvenience to the client. In setting up how to measure the metrics and in analysing the case studies, establishing consistency across the industry was challenging. So for example, all projects report on cost, but it was not always clear if the cost that we were getting was including the same aspects. So for example, some projects, on some projects we received initially just net cost, not including profit, so that which is the total cost of the client. Some excluded variations, whilst others included them. Some excluded external works or prelims. So for example, if a project was part of a larger group of projects. So yeah, establishing consistency is a big challenge. And related to this is the lack of detailed information, which makes it unclear to us to know what is included and what isn't. So for example, with construction waste figures, is this just construction waste? Does it include demolition and excavation waste? Or with construction energy usage, if we only get a total final figure in kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent without any breakdown of electricity or fuel type, there's no way to compare that to a project where we get the energy usage in kilowatt hours, because we don't have the conversion factors and the proportions. So in the analysed case studies, it was difficult to establish how the various project factors may have influenced the project results completely independently of the construction approach. So that's where I was touching on with the key project descriptors. But it also includes other aspects such as the procurement strategy used by the client, the design approach. Was the project initially designed for offsite construction, or was it a traditional project that was then modified for offsite construction? And how might that have impacted the outcomes? And the last overall finding that I'll touch on today is that the qualitative impacts are still largely undefined. And it was really difficult. We had great difficulty in establishing quantifiable metrics for these qualitative aspects of offsite construction, where we believe there really is large benefit to be found, such as workforce quality of life and impact on the community. So while there are tools for quantifying social value through financial proxy values, these can generally only be evaluated very narrowly and through very specific concerted effort on a project, and not at a broad, high level across projects. So this difficulty is compounded as well when looking at the expected regional economic uplift that could be expected, where social value would be better understood at a regional level instead of focusing on a project. And an example where tension came up, especially in our project steering group discussions, was looking at projects with a high level of offsite construction. There may be planning requirements to employ local labour local to the construction site, but it's not taking into consideration the fact that perhaps with their high level of offsite construction, they're providing more stable long-term employment in an area local to the manufacturing facility and not the construction site. Turning now to look at some actual results from the case studies. Very briefly, we'll show you two graphs as a demonstration of what you can find in the report. And again, looking at costs simply because this is something that everyone is very familiar with. We'll look at the cost on the vertical axis in pounds per meter squared and the gross internal floor area of the projects across the horizontal axis. And if we bring these up, we see for our low PMV projects, this is the spread of results we received. And then if we bring up the medium PMV projects, very similar. And then with the high PMV projects, again, a very similar spread of results. This project over here is an outlier. And when we looked into it, we noticed that the total construction cost reported included all of the refurbishment work on the project, and it had a high degree of refurbishment work. So that's why it's so important to have these other key project descriptors that you can look into. So you're not just making blind comparisons, so you can drill down and see, okay, what's happening? Why is this one sitting so far? So from these results, there doesn't appear to be a correlation just for our subset of projects. So please bear in mind, this was really a small subset of case studies that we were able to look into. But we don't see any clear correlation between pre-manufactured value and the construction cost when normalized against the gross internal floor area. In the report, we use box and whisker plots to visualize the spread of results. And I know not everyone knows how to read these, so we have got a little descriptor in the report that shows you what's happening. But it's just to show the spread of project results. So this is your 25th percentile line, this is your median line, and that is your 75th percentile line, showing you almost like a bell curve of what's happening on your results. So low, medium, high, and if we group them all together, using the same total construction cost, you can see there's not a huge difference across the different projects. So the report shows more of these graphs and goes into more detail. So if you look at just the construction cost or just the building work, how does that compare to total cost, and various interesting discussions looking at specific aspects. So I'm not going to go into more detail, but that's just a flavor of what you can expect. This research was a pilot test of the methodology on the case studies received, and the report ends with 3 suggestions on future research that could be conducted. So the first is to continue with data collection and to do this robustly, so we can get project benchmarks and create an evidence base, and then we can really start to see, is there a correlation between offsite construction and the expected predicted benefits. The second is to take this methodology and adapt and extend them so that they can be applicable to infrastructure projects. And work on this is already happening, and you'll hear from Joe shortly. And the third aspect is to do a detailed assessment of how offsite construction impacts social value. And we've detailed in the report like suggestions on how we think that this would be most valuable. To summarize, looking back over this research project as we draw this presentation to a close, we want to focus on what this report means to you as a stakeholder in the construction industry and what you can do. This research demonstrates that there's currently no consistent measurement or recording of project performance. And this does not mean that no metrics or KPIs are being measured. It's just that this is not happening according to a comparable framework. We are all measuring things, but we're measuring them differently. So we can't compare results from one project in one organization to results from another organization with great certainty. And this is not specific to projects with a high level of offsite construction. This appears to be happening across the board, whether it's traditional or volumetric. It's independent of construction approach. So there's therefore no robust evidence base against which to benchmark performance or to justify project decisions. We do believe that the construction industry should be able to achieve the benefits, the wide range of benefits, as is promoted in academic and industry literature. But in order to truly know what these benefits are and to quantify how these are related to the construction approach, specifically offsite construction, we need a fundamental change in how project performance is measured. And I'm now going to hand over to Cam, who leads us with a challenge in the Commission. What can you do?
Thank you very much, Tercia, for that. Now, firstly, may I start by sincerely thanking the organisations that Tercia referred to, who worked very closely with us in developing this methodology, because without their openness and their commitment to this report, it just simply wouldn't have been possible. Now, many of you will know from first-hand experience of the considerable benefits that can be achieved with using modern methods of construction centred around off-site construction. And these benefits are often particularly evident when it comes to dramatically improving program times and the cost savings as a result of it. However, what Tercia has shown is that despite the evidence from these exemplar projects, we found that the industry doesn't have a consistent approach to measuring performance, nor are we actually measuring many aspects of our work which could demonstrate the far wider project benefits and societal value that could be achieved by adopting modern methods of construction. And we would argue that it is this evidence base that would provide the greatest certainty that both clients and investors seek when making investment decisions. So what are the key issues? Well, really, as Tercia so clearly highlighted, although all organisations collect metrics of different forms to track direct project impacts such as cost, time, quality, etc., and many also measure some of the other broader performance measures that she referred to, perhaps the number of apprenticeships employed or overall waste that could be generated on site, we found that there was a lack of consistency in how the KPIs were being measured, and this was even within individual companies, not just between companies. And we also have to remember that there's no single correct set of metrics or KPIs to measure performance. What really matters is that the metrics are consistent, that we're comparing apples with apples, and we're measuring the same parameters in the same way, so that these are comparable and, importantly, reproducible. Now, on this project, a eureka moment for me came when we suddenly realised that this methodology is not only applicable to quantifying the benefits of off-site construction, but actually, if you think about it, this could be applicable for quantifying the benefits of construction as a whole. It's the same basic parameters, certainly at the top level, in all of the different areas of construction. So what do we believe is needed now? Well, firstly, we'd invite you to try it out. Test these metrics. They've been developed in liaison and closely with industry, and what we need now is to get a consensus. Then we need to broaden out the methodology that was developed for school buildings to other sectors of the industry, such as transport, water, energy, etc. And as Tercia said, Joe will be talking about that in a minute. Many of the metrics will actually be the same across all sectors, but we need to have the opportunity for specific sector parameters and also organisational specific parameters. Now, a key point for all of the potential users is that this methodology doesn't involve major change to existing management processes. Most organisations already collect some of this data or much of this data on the top level KPIs, as well as some of the broader metrics. But in many cases, these will match exactly what you're already doing or merely suggest a minor tweak to those particular measurements. And the key again is to make sure you've all got consistency across your individual projects and across the businesses. And as a second step, we need to adopt this methodology that's been proposed to measure the wider project and societal benefits to help us understand the true value of the projects and the true value to your organisations and importantly to your clients and society. And a key challenge for the research community is to work closely with industry to develop these into a consistent set of metrics for those more difficult, harder to quantify social benefits, which by their nature will involve some form of qualitative measures. So we genuinely believe that this methodology presented here offers an opportunity for the industry to capture the true value and benefits to society of adopting modern methods of construction, and this would act as a catalyst for transforming construction and dramatically improve productivity across the industry.